Well, as I indicated this morning, so although my lectures here were on topics of text linguistics, pragmatics, so this does not necessarily mean that all my research I'm doing is within these fields of text linguistics, or that I use pragmatic terms of speech X all the time. But I'm mainly interested in political texts and translation, and also contexts in which political texts get translated. And that's what I would like to talk to you about today. I gave a lecture in September at a conference in Warsaw, a conference about political linguistics, and when I saw the title and the call for papers, there was nothing about translation in it, and I thought, well, you have to send your abstract, and you have to say something about translation. And they contacted me and said, oh yes, your abstract is so relevant, and we would like you to give a plenary talk. I said, yes, even better. And then I'm now about writing up this paper, and that's I thought I use part of it for the discussion today, also to get a bit more feedback, which I can use for the lecture. Oops. Right. So one of the important concepts we need to think of is the concept of recontextualization, which comes from critical discourse analysis. Because if you think of how is politics or how political texts transmitted or transferred to the general public, so the media play a very important role in there. So if there is a speech, or the one we've just looked at, and then you have journalists reporting about it, so it's a different communicative event. The speech delivered in Parliament or delivered at a ceremony, and then journalists writing about it in a newspaper. So we have kinds of recontextualization, and journalists also take decisions then what to report and how to report it and how to contextualize it. And the way the media report about a particular political event or about a speech made by a politician has also an impact on how people, the public, perceives politics or what they think about a politician. So media play a role in the shaping of politics. And whenever we talk about recontextualization across languages and cultures, then translation has a role to play. So what I want to look at today are just two examples of discursive practices where we see a relation between politics, media, translation. One is a press conference, and one is a political speech. The press conference, which Badia defined as mediatization of political action, is a definition which I quite like, because you kind of stage the press conference for the media, so it's something where journalists are present. And the example I have is a press conference held by the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the American President George Bush, and this was in Germany, in the town of Stralsund, in July 2006. At press conferences, normally you have brief statements by the politicians, and then this is followed by questions, answers, where the journalists can ask questions to the politicians. And you find on the websites of the German government transcripts of these press conferences, and also on the website of the American government. And also for the American government, they speak of press availability, which is a nice name for the genre as well. So I have an English version and a German version of this particular press conference, and you have a bit more longer extracts on the handout. So what I have here is kind of to get it onto the PowerPoint slides, so just kind of reduced elements. So you might want to look at the handout as well. So for this one here, as I said, you find the transcript on the website of the German government, but it was also cited at the website of a German university. So that's the website you have here. And the English one comes from the office of the press secretary of the White House. And you see, that's what you see on the handout, the way the press conference is contextualized. So the title, you have the reference to time and place, is slightly different in the two versions. The German one is in English, in German only. There is no explicit indication that translation or interpreting was somehow involved. The website of the American government mentions translation, because then when they refer to the chancellor, the German chancellor, so you see it's given in brackets as translated, and then you have the transcript. So translation is invisible for the German website, but it's visible to the American one. But not more, no, there's no more explanation, it just says as translated, so by signaling to the person that the German chancellor was not actually speaking in English, but that translation was involved. Something else I noticed is what I've called style elevation. So if you look at the way Bush speaks, so these press conferences, you have these statements by the politicians first, which are kind of pre-prepared sometimes so that they have it in writing and read it out. But then when we have the interaction, when the journalists ask questions, so it's more spontaneous. So you're not knowing what questions will be asked and then find the answer which you had pre-prepared in writing somewhere before, but it's a spontaneous answer. So the text here also shows features, characteristic features of oral speech, spontaneous speech. False starts, hesitations, slightly grammatically incorrect sentences. So if you look at the way Bush is represented here, and you have the longer quote on the handout, you know, on the Iranian issue, for example, the last time we were together, we talked, spent a lot of time with Iran. So in the middle of the sentence, it's not continuing as initially planned, but changing the syntactic structure. So the American website has these kinds of characteristic features, spontaneous speech, informal style, quite consistently. On the German website, this has been made more elaborate or more grammatically correct. So all these kind of false starts or changes of the syntax in the middle of the sentence have disappeared. So the German text shows some part of intervention or in the process of translation or producing the German version then of what Bush said. So the style was turned into more grammatically elevated style. That's what you see quite consistently here. Also something which I did not put on the slide, but we discussed earlier with the tu, vous, du, sie differentiation. You see this on the handout in the box before this longer quote here, where the German Chancellor, Bush speaks, Chancellor, thank you very much, thanks for the invitation. In the German version, he uses the tu form, Frau Kanzlerin, ich danke dir sehr herzlich. So this is also a decision which was taken then by the interpreter, translator, to opt for the more informal tu form here. Yeah? So which probably requires knowledge of the relationship between the two or what form had been used in the previous exchange. So it's normally the same interpreter who comes along for interpreting between, or when they have their bilateral talks, who is then also interpreting at the press conferences. Something else I've used the label role performance here. So what you see on the American website, it's like the transcript of this is what happened at the press conference. So the reader gets this kind of immediate feeling of what was going on. And you see here at the end of Bush's turns, so he is then selecting the next journalist who can ask a question. So he finishes his turn, Charles's position on this, yes, Terry. So this yes, Terry is inviting speech act, inviting a journalist to ask the question. And also what's quite interesting here, you see he uses the first name. So this also establishes a community. So the President of the United States knows a particular journalist by name. So also as a journalist, you feel kind of pleased. This is a person who knows you. So what you see then, the journalist asks the question, addresses the two politicians, Madam Chancellor, Mr. President, introducing himself, full name, Terry Hunt, with the AP, so saying where he comes from, what his affiliation is. And then the question goes on. In the German version of the website, this journalist selection has disappeared. So the finishes, Bush, his answer, that's the end. So this selecting the journalist is not there. And then also the question, you don't know who the journalist is on the German version. So it starts directly with the question, no introduction of who he is. If you look at the German transcript, so when the journalist was a German, so they would give the name. So you see there here, Frage Scharlach on your handout. So the journalist is identified by name. But if the journalist comes from the States, so it just says question. Yeah? But also then on the American website, the German journalist, where the name was given there, the name is not repeated on the American website, just says question. So this kind of the interaction, the style of the interaction, is there on the American website, but not on the German one. So it's question answer, no signal of who the person was or that the person was selected. And this kind of informal interaction, or Bush showing that he knows journalists and is more an informal style, can also be seen in another example here. That's the last box on the handout. So just by looking at the two boxes, you see that the English one has much more, there are many more turns, question, answer. So the interaction between Bush and the journalist, there are many more turns than you have in the German one. So Bush again finishes his answer to the first question, ends towards peace. Then he again introduces or invites a journalist, addressing him, Steve. Yeah? So it's your turn. Thank you, sir. Just to follow up. And the journalist gets interrupted by Bush. Follow up on both of these. Yeah? So responding. Does it concern you? So then he asked the question about the political topics here. Bush, I thought you were going to ask me about the pig. I'm curious about that too. Laughter. So in the whole exchange at the beginning of the press conference, there was a statement where Bush and also Merkel were referring to a dinner in the evening where some pig would be served. So this pig makes a repeated appearance in this press conference. It's of no relevance whatsoever for the political questions they ask, but it adds somehow to this kind of informal tone, and Bush interacting with the journalists and showing, so we are friendly to each other. And also with the laughter, signals here, and that this is a kind of informal style. These exchanges, the reference to the pig is not there on the German website. So what you see on the German website, it's question about the political issues here. Bush then saying, I thought you were asking about the pig, but then answering the question. So it's not this interruption. Bush is speaking once. So you would say for the German reader of this transcript, you might wonder why Bush brings in this pig again, because it's not really coherently embedded. So it's a bit of information loss here. So press conference, and I've looked at a few more. I've just become much more interested in what's going on with press conference. I looked at a few more other examples, but it seems to be a kind of standard practice that for the American government, they write up what was said at the press conference, so to give the reader then a feeling of this is what happened with the informal style, with the interaction, with the laughter. There is also the possibility for some of these press conferences to click on another link and to get the video, so you can also watch it, which also then helps to explain some of peculiar formulations which you might find peculiar just by looking at the text. But then when you see the film, you also understand what else was going on. The German website of the government, much more formal, so all these interaction, the small talk, not there. The language also more neutral. So this is what I call elevation of style. So it also has an impact on how politicians come across. Yeah? So this kind of Bush friendliness, talking to journalists, being one happy family. So, and for the German politician, it comes more across as a more serious politician. Yeah? So if you want to do some kind of discourse analysis, and you analyze just web pages where you have transcripts of press conference in one language only, so if you're doing it for the German side, you end up with different results than if you were doing it for the American side. Yeah? That's why I thought for at a conference about political linguistics, so it's important to make people aware that whenever translation is involved, it's not necessarily the case that you get exactly what you think was going on in reality. So you need to be aware of these contexts as well.